This is the world of the Pleistocene epoch, an era shaped by harsh climatic shifts, commonly called the Ice Age. But in truth, it was a cycle of instability where glacial periods lasting tens of thousands of years alternated with interglacial times of thaw and warmth. The vast, dry and frigid steppe landscape was a typical ecosystem where life struggled against cold, brutal winds and scarce resources. Every element in this environment was an environmental pressure. Each creature had to adapt to survive or vanish. The heavy sky and stone-hard ground were not merely scenery, but conditions of existence that forged the fate of these primitive humans. Facing a gigantic prey, these hunters relied not only on strength. The chase itself was a severe test of instinctive understanding. Tracking footprints was not a purely instinctive act. It required a sequence of primitive calculations. They had to identify tracks, distinguish them from countless other natural markings, and most importantly, determine the direction and pace of the prey. Each footprint was a clue, and linking them together to predict the creature's next move was an early form of connecting signs in the mind. Moreover, noticing subtle anomalies like a freshly broken branch revealed a higher level of observation. The ability to read recent events, to recognize whether the beast was large or small, strong or weak. A successful hunt was the pinnacle of pack cooperation and directional strategy hunting by signs. A lone individual, no matter how brave, could hardly bring down a massive megalochorus in defense mode. This victory could only come from the strength of the entire group. Surrounding the prey from multiple sides, using silent gesture signals to coordinate and striking in unison were all proof of an organized pack. Each individual understood its role within the plan. This coordination not only maximized the chance of success, but also minimized the risk for each member. The hunt brought not just food, it reinforced the bonds within the group, reaffirmed roles and status while the young watched and learned. The repeated failure to hunt the flightless high-speed birds, such as diatrema, revealed a physical limitation of these primitive humans. Their bodies were built for endurance and long chases, but lacked explosive power over short distances. Their prey, on the other hand, had evolved for rapid reflexes and remarkable sprinting speed. The safe distance the flock always maintained, around 30 to 40 meters, was beyond the farthest range a thrown spear could reach. Air resistance and gravity quickly drained the spear of its kinetic energy and accuracy. These repeated failures created a survival pressure that demanded change. A solution born not of muscle, but of intellect. The creation of an entirely new tool opened a window into the growing complexity of the prehistoric human mind. It began with observation and experimentation, recognizing the spring force of a bent branch snapping a pebble far away. This was the first recognition of a basic physical principle in nature. The next step was association, how to apply that principle to another problem, specifically the act of launching a spear. The careful shaping of a wooden shaft carving a hook and a groove was no random action. It required a clear mental image of the intended tool and the necessary steps to create it. This was a union between the dexterity of the hands and the imagination within the mind. The spear thrower, or atlatl, marked a major shift in hunting methods. Physically, it acted as a lever, an extension of the arm. By increasing the effective length of the arm, it allowed the user to apply force to the spear over a longer duration and wider arc. This resulted in a spear that flew much faster and hit with far greater power. The weapon not only traveled farther, but also straighter and with far more impact. Mastering this technique required practice transforming the motion from a simple throw into a swift snap of the wrist and arm. The success in striking down prey from what was once an impossible distance broke the limits of the body. Vastly extending the range of the hunt and the potential food sources forever changing the balance between hunters and beasts. The existence of giant beasts such as the ancient wild ox aurochs posed a far greater challenge. This was a confrontation in which humans were clearly the weaker side. Their thick hide, massive muscles and deadly horns made them extraordinarily well defended. Even with the atlatl, a single spear could hardly inflict a wound deep enough to bring down a raging giant. This failure revealed a lesson in tool making. A tool, no matter how revolutionary, is not the solution to every problem. The pressure to survive forced them to think beyond invention. It demanded tactics and complex reasoning. Competing for prey with other predators such as wolf packs also shaped their behavior, forcing constant vigilance and competition for resources. Hiding and observing another predator in action marked a leap in cognition. Instead of viewing the wolves merely as enemies to be driven away, they began to see them as subjects to learn from. This required an instinctive form of understanding, the ability to infer the intentions of another species. They didn't just see wolves running, they saw a hunting method being carried out, the organized encirclement, the patience to exhaust the prey, and the coordination to isolate the weakest individual. It was a priceless lesson in the power of group hunting, a strategy they themselves practiced, though on a simpler scale. This observation planted the seed of a strange thought. Instead of only learning from the wolves, could they somehow take advantage of the wolves' own hunt? Intervening in a wolf hunt was a clever yet perilous act, an intelligent form of risk-taking. It was not a mere act of scavenging, but a complex calculation of group behavior. They realized that the decisive moment in a hunt, when the prey was exhausted but not yet dead, was when the wolves were most vulnerable tactically. By suddenly appearing in numbers, shouting and brandishing their spears, they created a situation that forced the wolves to make a choice: fight a costly, unpredictable battle with a new rival or temporarily retreat. Their focus on the prey, rather than attacking the wolves, was a crucial signal. And the decisive act, leaving most of the carcass to the wolves, transformed a potential confrontation into a silent agreement. They had borrowed the labor of the wolves, used their weapons to finish the kill, and repaid the favor with a share of the spoils. It was the first way two species hunted together without harming one another. Hunting by ambush is a method that demands waiting, but it exposes one of nature's harshest rules: unpredictability. The hunters might choose the perfect spot, camouflage carefully, and wait, yet they could not control chance. Prey's sharp senses, its sensitivity to the slightest changes in the environment, were instincts of escape shaped over countless generations. Each failed ambush was not only a night of hunger, It was a drain on body and spirit, with days of waiting and spent energy unrewarded. The repetition of such failures revealed that confronting the senses of prey directly was a losing battle. The shift in thinking from following the animal itself to observing and understanding its trail was a fundamental step forward. The animal was unpredictable, but the trail was constant, a rule etched into the ground. Recognizing that all creatures tend to move along familiar paths, the least demanding routes opened an entirely new way of understanding. The idea that the trail could hold the animal itself became the foundation of trap making. The act of digging a pit and waiting for the animal to fall in required faith that if done correctly, the creature would be caught. And the patience to await the outcome, the sharpening of stakes and the careful concealment of the pit's surface revealed meticulous preparation and attention to every detail to ensure success. The success of the trap was not merely about obtaining food, it was an unprecedented method. For the first time, they had secured a reward without being present at the moment of the hunt. The trap worked on its own, in their absence, a tireless and endlessly patient hunter. This invention freed them from the constraints of time and space. It greatly increased food gathering efficiency and reduced risk. More importantly, it reinforced a new way of thinking about hunting. Instead of confronting problems with strength, they began to see the natural workings of things and to create solutions that could function autonomously. The pit was not just a hole. It was thought transformed into action. The great migration of thousands of prehistoric horses represented an immense food source beyond imagination. Yet that very scale was also their greatest defense. The power of a panicked herd was not merely the sum of individual strength. It was a destructive force of nature. The solo attacks by young hunters proved clearly how powerless a small group was against the might of a moving herd. This failure forced them to realize that to exploit a resource on the scale of a herd, they needed a hunting strategy just as large. The problem was no longer how to kill a single horse, but how to control the movement of an entire herd. Building 2 rows of stone and thorn fences was not merely an act of construction, it was a deliberate attempt to reshape the terrain, transforming a natural valley into a colossal trap. This stands as one of the earliest examples of humans arranging natural materials to alter the landscape. The project required an unprecedented level of collective cooperation. It demanded participation from the entire community, from the strongest hunters to the elders. There had to be a shared plan understood by all members, clear division of roles, and a collective belief that days of hard labor would be rewarded. The stone funnel was evidence that the group had learned to unite with order and to think and act with long-term planning. The drive hunt toward the cliff was the pinnacle of manipulating herd psychology. They did not use strength to fight the horses. They used fear. Fire, smoke, and piercing screams were employed to create chaos and terror. leaving the herd no choice but to surge forward. They turned the animal's own instincts, fleeing danger and following the leaders against them, making the herd run toward death by its own momentum. When the lead horses reached the cliff's edge, the pressure from thousands behind created an unstoppable force, triggering a catastrophic chain reaction. This was a triumph of instinctive understanding, of knowing how animals move and fear, and of collective action, all shouting, all driving, all hunting in unison along the path they had prepared. The overwhelming success of the hunt immediately exposed a major problem in tool making. A mountain of carcasses was an enormous source of meat, but their tools were too crude to butcher and divide it efficiently. The hand axes, once the familiar and reliable instruments of the group, proved too heavy and too dull for the delicate work of slicing meat and skinning hides. The contrast between the vastness of the reward and the inadequacy of their tools created a serious challenge. They had to process the meat as fast as possible before it decayed or attracted scavengers. Frustration and helplessness when a precious tool shattered while striking a bone was clear proof that the old methods were no longer enough. The creation of the stone blade, made from sharp-edged flakes, marked a revolutionary new way of crafting tools. Instead of shaping an entire stone block, the young hunter recognized the value in the sharp fragments produced by striking. By carefully selecting and skillfully flaking the stone, using a controlled strike at a precise angle, he created an entirely new kind of implement, a thin, lightweight blade with an edge as sharp as glass. its effectiveness in cutting skin and meat far surpassed that of the hand axe. This marked the transition from multi-purpose tools to specialized ones for butchering, a crucial step that allowed humans to perform tasks with far greater efficiency. The discovery not only yielded a superior tool, but also introduced a method that produced more usable flakes, enabling many tools to be made from a single stone core. The emergence of specialized tools enabled a vital social evolution, the division of labor within the group. As the process of handling carcasses could now be broken down into smaller tasks, tool making, cutting meat, breaking bones, skin processing, and tendon collection, each subgroup focusing on a single task achieved maximum efficiency. When the women began to recognize and process animal tendons, turning a byproduct into a valuable material for binding and fastening it, revealed a profound understanding of how to use every part of the prey. The herd was no longer just a cluster of individuals performing the same actions. It had become a coordinated community working in rhythm. Each subgroup with its own role, each contribution essential to the survival of all. After mastering the hunt and the sharing of meat, a new invisible and unstoppable enemy appeared. Time manifested in the rotting of flesh. In the warmer air, bacteria and microorganisms began their work, turning a precious food source into a decaying mass. This was one of nature's most basic laws. Their great triumph now risked becoming a devastating loss, spoiled meat no longer edible. The worry of the aging leader was not fear of a beast, but helplessness before an unstoppable natural process. This revealed that obtaining resources was only the first step. The true key to survival lay in preserving and storing them for future use to endure through time. An unexpected event, a small accident, became the seed of one of the most important discoveries. A bundle of meat had fallen into a crack in a permanent glacier purely by chance. In the struggle for survival, the discoveries that ensured the group's endurance often came not from deliberate planning, but from sharp observation of accidental events. The natural environment in this case, the eternal cold of deep ice, had unknowingly provided the answer to their greatest problem. Yet an answer only gains value when there is a mind sharp enough to recognize it. This was the moment of realization, when the woman saw that the bundle of meat still kept its bright red color after a full day and night. While the other piles had begun to discolor and rot, her mind understood the cold of the ice kept the meat from decay. She connected two elements, the freezing cold and the preservation of freshness. This was the birth of the concept of food preservation through freezing. Her act of pulling the men's hands and showing them the striking contrast was an early form of communication through demonstration, highly effective in a world without complex language. This discovery not only saved their current food supply, from then on they learned to keep food for later, to store resources and to plan for times of scarcity. The act of carving deep into the ice wall to create a chamber was a deliberate repetition of what they had witnessed. was no longer a matter of luck, it was a method keeping meat in the ice. They were now actively shaping the environment to serve their purpose. Building this natural cold storage was a massive investment of labor driven by a clear goal of survival through winter. By sealing the meat within the ice, they protected it not only from decay, but also from scavengers. For the first time in their existence, they held a reserve of meat that could last for many days. They no longer feared tomorrow's hunger. The warmth and peace inside the cave contrasted with the raging snowstorm outside, with the final rewards of all their efforts and ingenuity. Food stability had produced a resource more precious than meat itself, time to rest and to think. When the mind was no longer consumed by the urgency of survival, it was free to explore new dimensions. Playing with the shadows on the cave wall marked the beginning of representing thought through image, the ability to use one shape to stand for another. And then the final act, using charcoal to draw a memory onto the stone, was an immeasurable leap. For the first time, an idea, a memory was stored outside the human brain, becoming a physical object that could be shared across generations. That drawing was not merely art, it was the beginning of the first human mark.